I kept the recipe box on the passenger seat the whole drive over, the way you do with something you're not quite ready to let go of yet. It had my mother's handwriting on the index cards inside, her actual handwriting, the loopy cursive she learned in a one-room schoolhouse outside of Sudbury before anyone had heard of the word aesthetic. And somewhere beneath those cards, tucked flat against the cedar bottom my father had cut and sanded himself 60 years ago, was something I hadn't told a soul about, not even my daughter. That night, my son-in-law called. His voice was strange. Careful. Like someone walking on ice they weren't sure would hold. "Mom," he said. He'd called me Mom since the wedding, which always softened me toward him more than I wanted to admit. "Mom, I need to ask you something. What exactly was inside that recipe box?" I sat down at the kitchen table. I set my tea on the placemat. And I thought about the best way to answer a man who had watched his wife throw it in the recycling bin in front of 40 people and said nothing. "Why do you ask, sweetheart?" I said. And that's where this story really begins. My name is Lorraine. Well, most people call me Lori, and I've answered to it for 67 years, so I won't pretend otherwise. I live in a small house outside of Guelph, Ontario, in the same neighborhood where I raised 2 children, grew 3 gardens, and buried 1 husband. My husband passed 2 years before this story happened. 38 years of marriage to a man named Douglas, who was the quietest, steadiest, most patient person I have ever known. Doug was a carpenter by trade and a thinker by nature. He built things slowly on purpose, in a way that would last. Bookshelves, deck furniture, cedar boxes, trust funds. That last part is what this story is really about. I should tell you first about the box, because the box is the whole of it. My mother made it, not the cedar shell, that was Doug's father. But she filled it. Over 50 years of marriage, she collected recipes on index cards, handwritten in that loopy cursive, annotated in pencil, where she'd changed the salt, or doubled the vanilla. Butter tarts, tourtière, a date square recipe that won the Elora Fair 3 years running in the 80s. She kept the cards in a cedar box about the size of a hardcover novel, with a small brass latch that had turned green with age. When she died, she left the box to me. Not my sister in Calgary, not the cousin who'd always admired it. Me, with a note tucked inside the lid in that same loopy hand. For Lori, who always knew the difference between a recipe and a love letter. "They're the same thing, sweetheart." I kept that box on my kitchen counter for 11 years. I cooked from it. I added my own cards in a slightly neater cursive, though not by much. And after Doug died, I started doing something he had asked me to do, quietly, on a Tuesday in the hospital, when we both knew how things were going. He asked me to bring him the brown envelope from the top shelf of his workshop. I'd seen that envelope 100 times and never opened it. I assumed it was receipts for the property taxes, or the old survey for the lot, or the kind of thing a practical man keeps, because throwing it out feels like a small recklessness. It held none of those things. It held registered savings certificates. Canadian ones, government-backed, going back 22 years. Bought every year around tax time, Doug said, in amounts that were modest, individually, and remarkable together. He'd started after our daughter's wedding, when he'd met her husband and come home very quiet. "Just a feeling I have," he told me, when I asked what was wrong. "I want to make sure there's something for the little ones that goes directly to them. Something nobody can intercept." I didn't fully understand what he meant at the time. I understood it completely later. On the envelope, in Doug's block print, he always printed, never cursive, said his cursive looked like seismic activity. It read, "For the grandchildren. Started 2002. Not to be opened until there are grandchildren to open it." Doug told me the total. I won't make you wait the way the family had to. It was just over $62,000. Then he told me the part that mattered more than the money. "Don't just hand it to them in an envelope," he said. His voice was thinner by then, but his eyes were clear, the way they always were when he was working something through. "Money in an envelope disappears. Tuck it into something they'll keep, something they'll have to look at every day before they find it." He paused. "Put it in your mother's recipe box, Lori. Put it in there with a letter for the grandkids, and let them find it when they open the box for the first time. Let them think they're getting recipes and find out they're getting everything." He smiled. The Doug smile. Small, certain. Let them find it. Those were nearly the last clear instructions my husband ever gave me, and I intended to keep them exactly. So I waited. Our daughter got pregnant, and I started writing. Not the recipes. I had plenty of those. But the letter. Doug had dictated it to me in fragments. A paragraph at a time when he had the energy, and I'd read it back each time until he was satisfied. A letter to grandchildren he'd never meet about who he was, where he came from, what he hoped they'd be. He'd grown up in Cape Breton, the son of a miner, the first in his family to finish high school. He knew exactly what a head start meant. He knew exactly what it felt like not to have one. Sealed in an envelope, he asked me to mark, "Open when you're old enough to need it. With love, Grandpa Doug." I copied the savings certificates, verified the totals at the bank. 62,400 and change, exactly what he'd promised, and tucked everything flat against the cedar bottom of my mother's box beneath her cards and mine. Then I closed the brass latch. I should tell you about my daughter, because I don't want her to be a caricature. She's more than what she did that afternoon, and the more is the part that breaks my heart a little. My daughter was always the organized one. Even as a child, her room was sorted by color, her books alphabetical, her feelings managed into tidy little compartments that she didn't open in front of others. She married a man who matched her energy precisely, ambitious, polished, the kind of couple who had their lives running like a project management software. They'd moved to a new build in Oakville, all open concept and quartz countertops, the kind of house that photographs beautifully and echoes a little when you talk in it. She'd done well for herself. I was proud of her for that. But somewhere along the way she measured things had shifted. Worth became something visible, quality became a brand name. And when the pregnancy happened, the nursery became a project. The baby shower became a launch event. And the whole thing started feeling less like welcoming a child and more like curating one. I tried to understand it. I did. She'd worked hard for the life she had, and she wanted it to look like the life she'd worked for. I get that. What I couldn't quite reach was the part where a cedar recipe box with a green brass latch didn't fit the picture. I should tell you about my son-in-law, too, because this story isn't fair to him if I don't. He's not a bad man. He's a man who chose comfortable over courageous for a long time, and by the time the shower happened, it had become a reflex so deep he probably couldn't feel it anymore. He was always kind to me in a surface way, held doors, laughed at my jokes, called me Mum with what I believe was genuine affection. But he had a way of going quiet when my daughter decided something, of smoothing his expression into agreement like pulling a sheet flat. He'd learned early that it was easier, and easier had calcified into habit. He was standing right there at the shower. I want you to know that. The shower itself was held at my daughter's house, which had been transformed for the occasion in the way that houses are when the person who lives in them has a vision and a credit card and a long weekend to execute both. Pampas grass, a ballooned installation, a table of food that was visually excellent and quantitatively disappointing. There was a chalkboard sign with the baby's name on it. They'd chosen the name before the shower, which I understand is common now, but still caught me off guard. Rowan. A lovely name, genuinely. Gender neutral, which they'd chosen deliberately, which I respected. I came with the box on the passenger seat. I'd wrapped it in brown craft paper with a bit of twine, because my mother's box didn't need dressing up. I'd tucked a small card under the twine in my own handwriting. 3 generations of recipes and something Doug wanted Rowan to have. Opened carefully. I was, God help me, excited. I'd imagined how it would go. My daughter would unwrap it, recognize her grandmother's box, feel the weight of the history in it, and I'd say gently, "There's something underneath the cards, sweetheart." From Doug. Feel along the bottom. I'd rehearsed it. I drove over, talking to Doug the way I do now, out loud, to the passenger seat where he used to sit. Big day, I told him. We're giving them the certificates. We're going to be grandparents properly. I had no idea I was about to watch 40 years of a quiet man's saving get dropped into a blue recycling bin. The gift opening was the centerpiece of the afternoon. My daughter sat in a white chair under the balloon arch, and her friends gathered around her with their phones out, filming. Because everything is filmed now, everything is content, and a baby shower is no exception. Her best friend, let's call her the one with the ring light, because she had actually brought a ring light, was positioned at an angle for optimal coverage. The gifts were opened one by one. A diaper bag with a French name I couldn't pronounce. A receiving blanket set from a shop on Queen Street West that cost, I later learned, what I used to spend on groceries for a month. A cashmere sleep sack. For an infant, cashmere, which the room received with the reverence usually reserved for religious objects. Each gift was held up to the camera, named by brand, appreciated by aesthetic. I watched my son-in-law across the room. He was standing near the kitchen pass-through with a sparkling water he wasn't drinking. He caught my eye once and gave me the kind of smile that's really an apology. I should have known then what kind of afternoon it was going to be. That smile said, "I know. I'm sorry. I've already decided not to do anything about it." My sister-in-law, Faye, Doug's younger sister, 62, the kind of woman who says exactly what she thinks approximately 3 seconds after thinking it, had squeezed in beside me. She was the only other person in that room who'd known Doug. She patted the craft paper on my lap. "The box?" she said, quietly. "The box," I confirmed. "Did you tell her what's in it?" "Not yet. Doug wanted them to find it." Faye made a small sound that was half approval and half concern. She'd been Doug's sister for 60 years. She knew exactly how he thought. "Lori," she said, "maybe tell her before she opens it, just so she's careful." I shook my head. Let them find it. Those were his words, those were his instructions, and honestly, it never occurred to me, in any version of how I'd imagined that afternoon, that a person would simply not open it carefully, would not, in fact, open it at all. When my turn came, my daughter's friend Kylie, the one with the ring light, picked up my craft wrap box from the gift table and read the tag. "From Grandma Lori," she announced, in the gentle, indulgent tone of someone announcing a child's drawing had been hung on the fridge. The room went awe. My daughter unwrapped it. I watched her hands on the paper, the casual efficiency of someone unwrapping something they've already categorized. The craft paper came off, and there it was. My mother's cedar box, 60 years old, the latch green, the wood worn smooth at the corners where 100 hands had touched it. My daughter looked at it. She turned it over once. "Is this a recipe box?" she said. "It is," I said. "It was your great-grandmother's. There's something underneath the—" "Oh, that's so sweet," she said, already looking up at Kylie's phone. "Grandma's recipes." She said it the way you say how retro about a rotary phone. Charmed. Dismissive. Moving on. "We actually have a lot of stuff to store already, so—" She looked around the room, and I watched her make the calculation I will spend the rest of my life replaying. The same calculation that some rooms force on you. The social math of a woman who knows she has an audience and a brand to maintain. She stood up, box in hand, walked to the recycling bin near the kitchen, the tall blue one, government-issued, the kind every house in Ontario has, and held my mother's recipe box over it. "We're going minimalist," she said, smiling for the camera. "Digitizing everything. No paper clutter." She tilted the box. "Thanks, Mom. It's really thoughtful." And she dropped it. Dropped it, the brass latch catching the light for half a second before the cedar box disappeared into blue plastic. The room made a noise. Not everyone, but enough. The scattered, uncomfortable laugh of people who aren't sure if it's funny, but follow the room's lead, because following the room's lead is easier than not. Kylie's ring light caught all of it. My son-in-law across the room went the color of old snow. His mouth opened. It closed. He said nothing. That was the moment that cut the deepest, not the box in the bin, my son-in-law's mouth closing. I want you to understand what I did next and why. I could have said something. I could have stood up and told the whole room what was in that box. $62,000 and a dead man's letter to grandchildren he never met. I could have made a scene that would have defined that afternoon permanently, that would have hung over every family occasion for the next decade. Part of me wanted to. The widow part, the mother part. The woman who had sat in a hospital room reading letters back to a dying man until he was satisfied with every word. But I looked at my daughter in her white chair under her balloon arch, performing her curated life for Kylie's ring light, and I understood something with a clarity that surprised me. The worst possible thing I could do was make a scene. Because a scene could be survived, explained, reframed. What could not be reframed was the truth, delivered later, in a room she couldn't perform her way out of, so I did the only thing that had any dignity in it. I walked to the recycling bin. I reached in. I lifted my mother's box out of the blue plastic. I brushed off a recycled envelope that had stuck to the cedar. I latched it closed. I tucked it under my arm. "I'll keep it," I said. My voice was steady. I've been surprised, since Doug died, by how steady I can be when I need to be. "You're right that you don't need more to store. I'll hold on to it." The room had gone quiet in the way rooms do when the temperature shifts and everyone feels it, but nobody names it. My daughter opened her mouth. "Mom, I didn't mean." "It's all right," I said. "Congratulations on Rowan." "I think I'll head out." I found Faye's eyes. She gave me a look that was part fury, and part heartbreak, and part absolute solidarity. I picked up my coat. I picked up the box. And I walked out of my daughter's open concept house with my back straight. I cried in the car. I want to be honest about that. I sat in my Corolla in the driveway with the box on my lap, and I let it happen for as long as it needed to happen, which was approximately 5 minutes and no longer, because grief has taught me something about its own timeline. You feel it fully, or it follows you home. The box still smelled faintly of the recycling bin, that clean, papery smell of flattened cardboard and good intentions. And something about that. About Doug's last letter and 62 years of patience sitting in a government-issued blue bin because it didn't fit a minimalist aesthetic. That was the thing that made me cry hardest. "I'm sorry, Doug," I whispered. I should have told her before she opened it. I should have protected it better. But here's what I have found in the 2 years since he died about clarity and grief. They travel together. By the time my tears stopped, something underneath had gone very still. The way the saint, Lawrence, goes still on a November morning when the cold has finally settled in, and you can see all the way to the bottom. I was not going to hand those certificates to a household that had just dropped them in the recycling bin for content. But Rowan, who was still a due date on a calendar, who had done absolutely nothing, Rowan still deserved his grandfather's gift. That was not negotiable. On the drive home, I started thinking like the woman I have always been when it matters. Practical, quiet, thorough. Not about how to make a scene. About how to make it last, exactly the way Doug had asked. I was almost home when Faye called. "I'm so sorry," she said immediately. "I should have said something." I sat there like a stone. "You and my son-in-law both," I said, not unkindly. "It's all right, Faye. I have the box. It's safe." A pause. "She doesn't know what's inside. She didn't open it. She just dropped it. She never looked inside." Faye was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Lori, I have to tell you, after you left, I was so rattled, I pulled him aside." "Your son-in-law," I told him. Her voice tightened. "I said his father-in-law's savings were in that box, all those certificates, and Doug's letter, just like Doug wanted." She paused. "Lori," the look on his face. I closed my eyes. "He went white," she said. "He left without saying a word to anyone, just left." I thanked her. I hung up. And I stood in my kitchen holding the box and understood that somewhere across town, my son-in-law was sitting with a detonation going off inside him. That he now knew the recycling bin had held Doug's 38 years of quiet love. That he had stood there and gone pale and closed his mouth and let it happen anyway. I put the kettle on. I waited. Mothers wait. It's one of the things we're good at. 4 minutes later, the phone rang. Before I tell you what he said, I want to tell you what I did in those 4 minutes, because it matters. I took the box to the kitchen table. I unlatched the cedar lid. I lifted out my mother's index cards, the butter tarts, the tourtière, the date square that won the Elora Fair, and set them aside. And there, pressed flat against the cedar bottom exactly where I'd placed them, were Doug's certificates in their elasticized bundle and the sealed envelope marked in his block print. "Open when you're old enough to need it. Love, Grandpa Doug." I held that envelope. I thought about the hospital room where he'd dictated it, stopping between sentences to breathe, asking me to read it back. He'd wanted this letter to outlive him by decades. He'd wanted a teenager somewhere in the future. Long after Doug was a photograph and a name, and a set of tools in a workshop, nobody had quite managed to clean out, to open an envelope, and meet their grandfather for the first time. And my daughter had nearly recycled that meeting for a minimalist aesthetic. "Let them find it," Doug had said, the one instruction he gave me. And she had held the box, decided what it was, and set it down in the blue bin without opening the latch. 30 seconds and one curious touch away from $62,000 and her child's inheritance. I put everything back. I did not latch it this time. I had a feeling I'd be opening it properly soon, for the right people. Then my son-in-law called, and before he said a single word, I could hear in his breathing that he was sitting in his car. "Mom!" His voice cracked on the syllable. "Please tell me you have it. Please tell me you took the box home." "I have it," I said. "It's on my kitchen table. It's safe." He exhaled, a long, shuddering breath that became, halfway through, something that wasn't quite a sob. "Faye told me," he said. "She told me what was in it." "I know, Mom." He stopped, started again. "What was?" "Faye said $60,000. She said Doug's letter. $62,000, I said gently. Doug bought registered savings certificates every year, a little at a time, for 22 years. They matured this year. And yes, there's a letter he dictated to me in the hospital for Rowan to open when they're old enough, to meet their grandfather someday. The line was very quiet. He started in 2002, I said, every year, every tax season. A few hundred here, a few hundred there. Because Doug wanted there to be something for this baby that went directly to them. Something no one could intercept. And then my son-in-law's, this quiet, accommodating, conflict-allergic man I had accepted into my family a decade ago, made a sound I had never heard from him before. Not a sob exactly. More like a man surfacing from something cold and deep where he'd been longer than he realized. "I was standing right there," he said. "I watched her, and I smoothed my face and I held my drink, and I didn't say anything because it's what I do. It's what I always do." A pause. I told myself it was just a recipe box. I let him sit in that. I told myself it was just an old box. Don't make it a thing. And it was Doug. Mom, it was Doug's. He stopped. "I know," I said. "How are you not furious with me?" I thought about that honestly. "Because you didn't know what was in it," I said. "And because being furious takes energy I'd rather spend on Rowan. And because," I paused, "because I know that what you're feeling right now is the point, sweetheart. This is the moment you'll remember." He was quiet again. "What do you want to do?" he said finally. "Whatever you want, I'll do it. I'll tell her. I'll do whatever you need. I want one thing," I told him. "I want everyone together. You, your wife, Faye, your wife's mother if she'll come. Everyone in one room. And I want to give Rowan their grandfather's gift properly." Out loud, the way Doug asked. I let it settle. Doug said, "Let them find it. So we're going to find it together. Just a little later than planned." He told her that night. He had to. There are things too large to carry quietly, and he'd been carrying enough quiet things for long enough. I wasn't there for that conversation. I heard about it later from both of them, and the two versions tell you everything you need to know. His version, he sat her down and told her about the certificates, the letter, all of it, and her first words, her very first words, were, "How was I supposed to know? She should have said something. Who puts savings certificates in a recipe box without telling anyone? That's not fair. That's actually kind of on her. That sentence, that's actually kind of on her." I turned it over in my mind for a long time afterward. Not with bitterness, exactly. More with the sad recognition of someone who had been handed the truth and immediately looked for the exit. Her version, when I eventually heard it, was that she'd been blindsided, that the presentation had been unclear, that she was managing a lot with the pregnancy, and nobody appreciated how much she was holding. Not once in any version did she say the words, "I'm sorry," and mean them. I want you to hold on to that, because it mattered for what I decided. I made some phone calls the following week. I put on my reading glasses and I opened Doug's cigar box. Yes, he had a cigar box too, separate from the envelope, where he kept the original purchase records. And I called the bank first. The advisor, there was a young woman named, well, It doesn't matter what her name was. She was patient and thorough and confirmed everything Doug had told me. $62,400 and some dollars. Every cent of it, purchased in small, deliberate amounts by a man who thought in decades. Then I called a solicitor, a woman who had helped me with Doug's estate, and who had, at the time, gently suggested I think about what I wanted to do with inherited assets going forward. I thought about it now. I set up a formal trust for Rowan, a real one, registered, administered independently. The money would go to the child, education, a down payment, a start in life. Accessible when Rowan reached adulthood, and not a dollar of it touchable by either parent in the meantime. Not by my daughter, not by my son-in-law, not by me. Doug's money, going directly to Doug's grandchild the way Doug intended. It cost me something to lock my son-in-law out too. I want to be honest about that. He hadn't known what was in the box, but he had stood by the bin and said nothing. Doug's wish had been that the gift go to the baby, not to the household, and the cleanest way to honor a wish is to make it impossible to redirect. Then I did the other thing. The thing that mattered more to me than the money. I planned a dinner. At my house, which smells like 40 years of good cooking, and has a table that fits exactly the right number of people for a hard conversation. I sent the invitations by phone. I'm not above email, but there are moments that deserve a voice, and I told everyone simply, Sunday dinner. I'd like to give Rowan their grandfather's gift. Please come. Rowan arrived 6 weeks before the dinner. Sunday morning, 7 pounds and impatient about it, with a frown that I recognized immediately and completely. When they placed that baby in my arms, that cross little face working itself into a protest about the indignity of being born. I saw Doug so clearly I had to sit down. There you are, I whispered. We've been saving up for you. The baby changed the atmosphere a little, the way new babies always do. My daughter was softer in those first weeks, exhausted, human, stripped of the curation by sheer biological necessity. I let myself wonder if the dinner was still necessary. I let myself hope. Then I saw the first photo she posted. Rowan in a $60 onesie from a boutique in Yorkville, filtered and framed and captioned with brands, and I understood that the softness was hormones, temporary, and the values were the structure underneath. Which meant Doug's letter mattered more than ever. That baby was going to grow up in a house that taught them worth is something you can read off a label. Somewhere in Rowan's life, they'd need the opposite lesson. I got out the box. They came on a Sunday, all of them, into my house that smelled like the roast I'd put in at noon. Because some things you do on purpose. My daughter, careful. My son-in-law, quiet and prepared. Faye, early as always, having commandeered my kitchen long enough to make sure the butter dish was full. My daughter's mother, I'll call her what she is, the grandmother from the other side, had come too because my daughter had told her, and because not coming would have looked worse than coming. I'd set the table properly. In the center where a vase would normally go, I'd place the cedar box, unlatched. My mother's handwriting visible on the top card, her date square recipe, the one that won the fair. My daughter's eyes went to it the moment she walked in. Her face did something complicated. She hadn't expected to see it here. I think she'd hoped it would resolve itself quietly, the way uncomfortable things do for people who've arranged their lives so that discomfort is managed by someone else. We ate first. I was firm about that. You don't do the hard thing on an empty stomach, and I wanted everyone settled, fed, and sitting. We talked about Rowan, who slept in a carrier on my son-in-law's chest and did not care about any of us, which was appropriate. My daughter thanked me for the roast and seemed genuine about it. It was, for a little while, almost pleasant. Then I cleared the plates. I sat back down. I put my hand on the box. I'd like to give Rowan their grandfather's gift, I said, the way Doug asked me to before he died. Properly, this time. The table went still. You held this box a few weeks ago, I said to my daughter. My voice was warm, because I meant it to be. I was not performing calm. I was calm, the way you get when you've been sitting with something for long enough. You decided what it was, and you set it down in the recycling bin. I'd like to show you and everyone here what you were actually holding. I picked up the seam ripper I'd set beside my place, though in truth I didn't need it. I'd left the latch unlatched. and I opened the box. I lifted out my mother's index cards and set them gently to one side. And then I reached to the cedar bottom and drew out what Doug had put there, and I laid it on the table piece by piece. "These," I said, setting down the elasticized bundle, "are registered savings certificates, Government of Canada. Doug bought them every year at tax time for 22 years. Every year since Rowan's mother was married and Doug came home quiet from the wedding." I smoothed the top certificate. "They matured this year. They're worth $62,400. The number moved around the table like a cold wind off Georgian Bay. My daughter's mother set down her water glass. My daughter went pale in a way I recognized. Not guilt, not yet, but the dawning comprehension of magnitude. "And this," I said, setting down the sealed envelope the way you'd set down something sleeping, "is the last letter your husband ever wrote." My son-in-law made a sound low in his throat. He dictated it to me in the hospital. "It's for Rowan to open when they're grown, so that a young person who will never meet their grandfather can sit down someday and hear from him anyway." I touched the envelope. I let myself feel it for a moment. Doug said, "Let them find it. Put it in something they'll open. Make it matter." That's what I was trying to do. I looked up at my daughter. I kept my voice as gentle as I have ever kept it, which, I have learned, can be its own kind of clarity. "This is what you held in your hands at the shower," I said. $62,000 and the last words of a man who loved you. This is what you called a recipe box. This is what you set in the recycling bin on camera because it didn't fit the minimalist aesthetic no one moved." My daughter's mother looked at her hands. "You can't." My daughter started. Her voice was thinner than usual. How was I supposed to know? There was nothing on the outside to say. "You should have told me. You should have said something before I opened it." That's not a fair way to." "You're right that I should have said something," I told her. And I meant it. I'd been thinking about it for weeks. I should have stood up before you opened the latch and told you there was something underneath the cards. That was my mistake. I was honoring Doug's wish to the letter, and I forgot that not everyone would treat an old cedar box with care. That assumption, that anyone would naturally open a gift gently and look inside, that was on me. She blinked. I don't think she'd expected me to concede anything. "But," I said, and my voice stayed level, "what happened after the box was in your hands was entirely your choice. Doug didn't put you in that position. I didn't put you in that position. You were holding a gift, and you made a decision about what it was worth based on what it looked like, and you set it in the recycling bin in front of 40 people with a camera running. That decision was yours." My daughter's mother started to speak. I turned to her once, gently. "I'd sit this one out," I said, and she sat it out. The silence in the room had weight. My son-in-law was looking at the table. My daughter was looking at the box, at my mother's handwriting on the date square card. "Here is what happens now," I said. "Rowan gets every cent. Doug saved it for the grandchild, and the grandchild will have it. But I can't hand open certificates to a household that set them in the recycling bin for a minimalism aesthetic. Not because I want to punish anyone, but because Doug's wish was for this money to reach Rowan directly. So I've set up a formal trust, registered, independent, administered for Rowan alone. Education, a start in life. It cannot be touched by either of you until Rowan is an adult. Not borrowed against, not redirected." I looked at my son-in-law gently. "Including by you, sweetheart. I'm sorry for that. But you were standing at the bin." He nodded once. He didn't argue. "And the box," I said, "comes home with me tonight. Rowan can have it when I'm sure it'll be cared for." My daughter opened her mouth. My son-in-law said her name, just her name, in a voice I had never heard him use with her. Something in it that had not been there before. Not anger. Something quieter and more final than anger. She closed her mouth. "There's one more thing," I said, "the most important thing. The thing Doug actually wanted." I took the smaller envelope from my cardigan pocket, the one he'd said to open the day the family first heard about the gift. He wrote something for all of us. For this moment. He didn't know it would be this kind of moment. But here we are. I opened it. My hands shook a little, but not from cold. I read my husband's words to his family in my kitchen, with his granddaughter asleep against her father's chest. You're hearing this. I read then the little one has finally arrived, and I'm sorry I couldn't be there to be underfoot about it. I've been putting money away since the wedding because I've always believed the best gift you can give a child isn't money. It's proof that someone was thinking about them before they existed. That's what's in this box. Proof that you were wanted, Rowan, by an old man in a workshop in Guelph who never got to meet you. Spend the money on something that lasts. And whatever you do, learn the difference between what something costs and what something is. Your grandmother knows. Ask her. All my love, Grandpa Doug. My son-in-law had his cheek pressed to the top of Rowan's head, and his shoulders were shaking. My daughter was looking at the box, and she said something I did not expect, quietly, not to the room, almost to the cedar. I didn't even open the latch. No, I said. I looked at it, and I decided. She looked up at me. Her eyes were full. I decided what it was without opening it. Yes, I said. You did. And that, I think, was the beginning. Not forgiveness. It was too early for that. But the beginning of something. The beginning of knowing what she'd done, all the way down without explaining it away. I gave the room a moment, then I softened, because I am not a woman who mistakes severity for justice. I didn't do this to humiliate you, I said to my daughter. I did it because that baby is going to grow up in your house, learning your values, and someday Rowan is going to need to know there was another way to look at things. The trust is for their future. The letter is for their heart. Moat. And the box, I rested my hand on the cedar, is just to remind all of us, including me, that the most valuable thing in a room is almost never the thing that looks most valuable. I looked at my son-in-law. You stayed quiet at the shower because quiet was easier. I know you know that. He met my eyes. Doug was the same way with his father for a long time. Then one day, he told me he decided he'd rather be slow and right than fast and quiet. He never forgot the difference after that. He nodded. He couldn't speak. I'm Rowan's grandmother, I said then to the table. Not optional. Not a nice to have for holidays. I'm in this child's life, fully, or we have a harder conversation than this one. Those are the terms. Nobody argued with the terms. In the months after, this is what I can tell you. The trust is growing. $62,000 sitting quietly in Rowan's name, doing what Doug intended, waiting. Patiently, the way Doug himself would have. The bank confirms a statement every quarter, which I receive and file in the cedar box, along with everything else. My daughter deleted the video within 24 hours of the dinner. But Kylie had already shared it to her own account, and a handful of family members had seen it. And the story of the woman who recycled her mother-in-law's recipe box at her baby shower became, quietly, a thing people in their circle knew. My daughter spent a long season being known in her own network as the one who'd done that. I didn't do that to her. She filmed it herself. My daughter's mother and I have reached a kind of détente. She brought me a poinsettia at Christmas, which I accepted. It's enough. My daughter and I are careful with each other, the way you are after something large. She has not fully apologized. I don't think she knows how. But a few weeks after the dinner, she called me and asked, quietly, if I'd teach her to make her great-grandmother's butter tarts. We stood at my kitchen counter on a Saturday morning with my mother's index card between us, and we made a batch that was imperfect and real, and smelled exactly right. She took a photo. Of course, she did, but she didn't post it. She just looked at it for a moment and put her phone back in her pocket. It's a start. My son-in-law changed the most. Something in him broke open that night at the dinner table, and what grew back was straighter. He came to my house alone about a month later and sat at the kitchen table and said, I've been thinking about the shower. Every version I run ends the same way. I didn't fail Doug when I let the box go in the bin. I failed him the whole decade before that. Every time I went quiet to keep the peace. The box was just the thing I couldn't unsee. I know, I said. Why didn't you ever say anything? Some things a person has to find on their own, I told him. I could have told you 100 times. It took a recipe box in a recycling bin to make you believe it. He's different now. He speaks up. He and my daughter are working on things, which is all I'll say about that, because it's theirs, not mine. But he's kept Doug's old Stanley hand plane on a shelf in the workshop. He's taken up woodworking, which I find unbearably moving. And he's told Rowan, who can't understand yet but will, that Grandpa Doug was a carpenter and someday they'll build something together. I'm still learning too. In case you think this story belongs only to the young, the box lives on my kitchen counter. My mother's cards inside, my own cards behind them. The trust documents folded in an envelope at the bottom, where the savings certificates used to be. And at the very back, in Doug's block print on a card I made myself. For Rowan, with love, already waiting for you. My hands are a little stiffer this winter than last. Arthritis moves in the way it does, gradual then suddenly, but I'm teaching Rowan's mother to bake, one Saturday at a time, one index card at a time. And someday I'll teach Rowan directly. Because that's what you do. You put the important things somewhere they have to be found. You write them down in your own handwriting. You latch the brass clasp and you trust that the right person at the right moment will open it. Learn how to open things carefully. Learn how to look at what's actually inside before you decide what something is worth. That's the inheritance, not the money. That's what Doug saved up all those years to give his grandchild. And that's what I'm giving you now, whoever you are, watching this from wherever you are. The box was just the beginning. It always is.